the movement as well, so it's going to be a little bit simple from the beginning, but we're going to actually make it a little bit more advanced by time. So if you just follow these tutorial videos that I'm going to be making, or this entire series, you're going to be able to make the game from scratch, and you're going to be able to follow, obviously, the whole tutorial, and it's going to be a lot more easy for you. And so just don't, skip a part. I'm not saying that I want the views, but, just make sure that you watch it, so you watch them all, so that you can actually follow the entire tutorial. But yeah. And next up, I also want to import a new asset, so I'm going to go to right-click again, and then I'm going to pick Import Package. And inside of the list, I am going to... Actually, now that I'm thinking of this, we don't really need the characters pack, because we are actually going to be creating our own player script here. So we don't really need that. So what I can actually do, I can just create a... By the way, this is a brand new scene. As you can see, I just have a main camera and the directional light inside of the scene. So there's nothing specific. What I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to modify the scene. So I'm going to go to Game Object on the top left corner, and then I am going to pick 3D Object and then choose Plane. So this... Plane is going to be our ground for the player to start off with, and then obviously once again we're going to be making it more advanced. Obviously when you're making a game, it's very important that you just start off by basics, so you just like create really simple foundation. For your game and then go from there. If you create everything from the beginning, it's going to be very difficult for you. So just try to make something really basic, and then from there you can obviously go on and develop the game further out. And that's exactly what I'm going to be teaching you guys how to do in this series. So that's the entire point, actually. So for the player, we could actually just use a cube for the moment being, and that's going to be like a placeholder for the player. But before we actually do, yeah, I'm going to create a cube. So you can just kind of repeat what I'm doing here. And I'm going to create a cube, and then I'm going to call this cube player holder. So this is very important, guys. Call it player holder. And then I'm going to duplicate this cube. So control, you hold down control and you press D. If you're on Mac, you probably just hold down command and then press D, and I'm gonna call this now player. So one is going to be called player holder, and the other one is going to be called player. So I'm gonna go to player holder, and I'm going to delete cube mesh filter, so I'm gonna remove the component, and I am also going to remove the component called box collider. I can also be called player. So I'm gonna go to player holder, and I'm going to delete cube mesh filter. I'm going to remove the component, and I am also going to remove the component called box collider. I can also remove mesh render because this is going to be an empty object, so it's not very important for us to have anything specific on it. So next up, guys, I want to drag my player into my player holder. So I just drag my player into the player holder, and this is going to create a child object of the player holder, or this is going to turn player into a child object of the player holder. So player holder is going to be the parent here, and you can also unfold this, but I prefer having it open. And for that matter, I'm also going to drag this to the top of my hierarchy so that I can actually keep an eye out, and it's going to be a little bit more easy for me. So now next up, I also want to add a new component to player holder. So almost everything that we're going to be doing on for our player, like adding a component and all that, is going to be going through player holder. But the reason I'm doing that is basically because the player is right now a cube. So if if we ever come back and change it to an actual 3D model, which we're probably going to be doing, and I'm going to make it so that it can play animations and all that, because this is going to be an entire game. So I'm gonna go back to player once I hit that point in a tutorial. I don't know what episode it's going to be, but I'm gonna go back to the player and I'm going to change it to a actual 3D character mesh. So it's gonna be a lot more easy for us to actually have a player holder and just literally hold the player mesh for us. So with that being said, I want to go to player holder and I want to click on add component, and I want to add the player component that we created previously. So you can just search player, or you can drag it and drop it from your project tab into the inspector tab. But just make sure that you're adding it to player holder, that's very important. And I also want to go to main camera, and I want to place the main camera so that I can actually see the player, but obviously since this is a top-down game, I want to place the camera as I want it to be actually for when we're actually playing the game. So let's say this is going to be the camera for the moment being. I just want to move this down a little. So let's say this is going to be the camera for the moment being. But obviously since this is a top-down game, I want to place the camera as I want it to be. actually for when we're actually playing the game. So let's say this is going to be the camera for the moment being. I just want to move this down a little, maybe a little bit up. And let's see here. I'm just gonna unfold these. I could actually add a rigid body component to the player. So I'm gonna go to player, not player holder. I'm gonna go to player and actually we could add this to. I'm gonna test adding rigid body to the player holder and see how it works. Just to make sure that the player holder isn't falling through the ground, or else it's gonna be a little bit trouble, but we'll see. Okay, so it's not falling down. Good. So basically, just add a rigid body component to your player holder, not player. Because we obviously want the player holder to be the one that is actually going to register all the movement, including gravity, or including being affected by gravity. So just add a rigid body, and you should be fine to go. I want to go back to my main camera. Oops, I made a child object. I want to go back to my main camera, and I want to add a new component to it, and I want to add the camera component. So actually what I could do here, I could just drag and drop the camera component that I created, which is the C# script, through my project tab to my inspector window. Just make sure that you're adding it to your main camera. For some reason, when you actually search for camera as add component, it's going to add the actual component created by Unity 4a camera, which is already added, so we don't really want to do that. And actually the icon is bugging out for some reason, so I'm just going to try to open this camera script up in Visual Studio and see if it's bugging out. If not, we're fine to go. If it is, we're just going to change the name. And we can see that it's working fine because obviously nothing is filled out here, so we're fine to go. And I want to start off by actually like erasing these two voids that are created for us by default. And I want to add a few. I want to start tab to my inspector window. Just make sure that you're adding it to your main camera. For some reason, when you actually search for camera as add component, it's going to add the actual component created by Unity 4a camera, which is already added, so we don't really want to do that. And actually the icon is bugging out for some reason, so I'm just going to try to open this. This camera script up in Visual Studio and see if it's bugging out. If not, we're fine to go. If it is, we're just going to change the name. And we can see that it's working fine because obviously nothing is filled out here, so we're fine to go. And I want to start off by actually like erasing these two voids that are created for us by default. And I want to add a few, let's see here. I want to add a comment line here and say variables. And I want to go down a little bit, like press enter a few times and then add a new comment line saying methods. So this is going to be a little bit more easy, or it's going to make it a little bit more easy for us to keep a track of whatever section I'm working on. So if I ever say, well, we're going to go back to the variable section now, you will understand that I mean the whatever is underneath the variable comment and whatever is above the methods comment. So it's really easy. You should get the hang of it quite easily. But if you're having any trouble, just watch the video a little bit closer, like a little bit slower, and let me know in the comments. A new public transform, and I'm going to call this player. So this is going to be the player that we want the camera it, and I'm also going to create a, and this is basically going to be the float that we're going to be using for the smoothness of the camera. Camera follow, and by default I'm gonna set it to 0.3f, and if you feel like this is way too much for you or way too less, just make sure to play around with the value. You don't really have to have it as same as me, just make sure that you have the same variable. I also want to create a new one, and this is going to be a private vector3 velocity is equal to vector3.0. So we're obviously going to be creating a new private vector3, which is the third dimensional movement system pretty much. And it's going to be called velocity, which is going to set the current velocity of the camera to 0 whenever it's idle, so that it doesn't, you know, follow whenever it's idle. And I want to go to methods section now, and I want to say void update. And then inside of here, I'm going to say vector3 goal, or actually like just I could just say POS, which means like which stands for position. So vector3 pos or POS is equal to new vector3. There we go. So we're basically creating just a new vector 3. That's as much as it is. And if you're having like a green underline, if you're using Visual Studio, you're probably going to have this green underline, and probably even if you're using like a different IDE. But basically what that means is the variable POS is assigned, but its value is never used. So basically it's telling you, well, you're creating a variable here and you're not using it for the moment. But it's going to disappear in a while, and even if it doesn't, you shouldn't really care about it. Like, don't let it bother you. So what I want to say here is pos.x is equal to target or player.position.x. So we're basically setting the position that we created newly, the x, like the x alignment of it, I guess, like. That's a bad word, but position x equal to player position x, which means that we're setting the position alignment in x line to the same as player position x. Okay, so axis was the word that I was searching for. So basically vector 3 position, we created a new vector 3, and then we're setting that position, or POS, pause, whatever you want to call it. I'm actually going to call it POS. POS x-axis is going to be set to player position x-axis. So the players, and that's done just to make sure that the POS x-axis is following the player x-axis. And when we're actually playing the game, it's going to make a little bit more sense to you. Right now, it's just a little bit difficult to kind of like describe what it does, but basically it's going to make a lot more sense when we're playing the game. And I also want to set the axis for z axis, so we're going to say pos.z, pretty much the same thing, and then we're going to set it to equal to player.position.z, so we're using the z axis. But before ending here, I also want to say minus 7f. So what this is going to do is we're going to set the the axis for the alignment in z axis, which means depth. So we're going to set the position z to player z, which is going to be the z-axis once again, but we're going to make minus 7, and the 7 is going to represent how far we want the camera to be behind the player so that we can actually look at the player. If we have it on like just like this, it's basically going to place the camera above the player, like on top of player. And we don't want it because we obviously want to be able to see the player. So once again, this value is just experimental. I'm using 7 because it's my favorite number, so I'm a little bit biased there. But you can use a different value, and if this works for me, I'm gonna keep it like this. But if I feel like it's a little bit too close, or even too far, I'm gonna change it up. So you can do the same for your game as well. And I want to do the same thing for position y, so that we can actually change the y-axis. So I'm just gonna say pos.y is equal to player.position.y. Pretty much the same thing. And here we don't have to play around with the value, which is going to be like a 7f or anything, because we just want the y-axis to be the y-axis of the player. And next up, I want to set the actual position of the camera to the position that we're actually setting for position, or the POS value that we're using. So I'm going to set transform.position, which means the position of this transform right now, basically the camera, is going to be equal to vector3.smoothDamp, which is going to increase the smooth movement system, or basically it's going to allow us to use the smooth movement system. And we're going to say transform.position POS ref velocity, and then we're gonna say smooth. Should be working fine. Yeah, there we go. So basically we're just saying we're gonna use the smooth damp function of vector 3, and we're setting the initial transform position to, or the initial position of this transform into this transform's position, and we're also setting the final position, which is going to be the following position, to the POS variable that we created, which is going to include the values of the player. And then we're just setting the velocity, and we're also setting smoothness to, or actually just setting a value for how smooth we want it to move. So it's going to be a little bit more easy for you once again when you go back to Unity, which we're going to smooth we want it to move. So it's going to be a little bit more easy for you once again when you go back to Unity, which we're going to do right now. So I want to go back to Unity and I want my camera to load up these variables. And inside a player, I just want to drag the player. I want to drag the player holder. Sorry. So there we go. All right, so I can play the game. Game now, and obviously we're not able to move the player right now, but you can see that the camera is moving already, and the y-axis could be played around with a little bit from what I realized, but if you look at your scene window, it should be working fine when you move. Hold up, there's a problem with this. Okay, so the problem was that position or POS Y set to player position Y was basically bugging the camera out. So what we want to do is we want to go back to this line, and we want to add by plus height. And height is going to be the new variable that we're creating here. So underneath public float, I want to go back to the variable section if you remember that correctly. And underneath public float smooth, we want to say public float height. There we go. And now I can go back to Unity. Float smooth, we want to say public float height. There we go. And now I can go back to Unity, and inside of the, if I go back to main camera, inside of the camera component, we're gonna have a new variable called height. And inside of here, I can just add a value that is going to be representing the height of the camera. So position Y was basically bugging the camera out. So what we want to do is we want to go back to this line, and we want to add by plus height. And height is going to be the new variable that we're creating. So underneath public float, I want to go back to the variable section if you remember that correctly. There we go. Main camera, inside of the camera component, we're gonna have a new variable called height. And inside of here, I can just add a value that is going to be representing the height of the camera. So how far up do we want the camera to be above the player? And I can test it around with 7, once again, because it's my favorite number. And we should see if that works. It's fine. That's actually pretty cool. So I can now move the player around. Oh, not the player. Player holder. There we go. And you'll see that the camera is following smoothly, which works fine. Good. And we can also move it up and down, and it's gonna fall down obviously because we have a rigid body attached to it, so it's being affected by gravity. Artificial gravity. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So what we're gonna do before we actually end this episode here, I wanna go back to, or actually I wanna open up the player script, and I want to edit the player script as well and add the player component so that we can actually move around with the player a little bit. So I just open up the player script, and once again I just do the regular routine by deleting or erasing the default built-in voids that are added with movement speed. The important part is obviously also that you learn. So if you feel like you didn't really learn what the code does, let me know.
si va a
me know in the comments down below and I'll try to reply to you because it should be easier to write it down. So first and foremost, we're going to set player plane, which is going to be a new variable, equal to new plane vector3.up transform.position. So this is going to track this is going to be like a plane that we're using to track the camera position. And now we're actually going to monitor or create an array that will actually monitor the position of the mouse so that we can actually register it and see where the player should be facing and where the mouse is actually located. So ray, and we can actually call this ray. And this is very important. So you want to have capital R on ray, the first ray, and then second ray you just want to use a lowercase ray, or R, sorry. And then you just say equal to camera.main.screen point to ray input.mouse position. So this is basically going to create a new ray which is going to be using the main camera's screen point to ray, which is like a function for using rays, and it's going to convert the mouse position into a ray which is going to be casted onto other objects in order to actually detect where the mouse is looking, or at least where the mouse is. And I'm having a little bit of trouble here, as I can see. For some reason it's not letting me use camera.main, which should be fine to use. Let me see here. What if I do like this? Nope. So we could actually have to attach the camera as a public game object. Actually, we can just do that. So I'll go back to variable section, and underneath public float movement speed, I'm gonna say public game object camera. Alright guys, so apparently what the problem was is the fact that I checked it on Google, or Unity's forums to be correct, and it says that as soon as you're using a camera script or like a component that you create and you call it camera, it's going to automatically pick that camera script for some reason. Either that's a bug or I'm just being stupid, but basically there's a very easy fix which you can basically just say, once again, ray equal to unity engine.camera.main. So the only difference is that I just added unity engine dot, and that's pretty much it. So I'm gonna keep my public game object camera because I'm probably going to be using that variable as soon as possible anyway, so I'm just gonna keep it the way it is. it is. And I think we could just proceed with the code and see if it works out. If it's, you know, if it turns out to be like a bugged out again, I'm gonna try to come back and fix it, but it should be working fine. So I also want to have a variable that is going to be calculating the distance that the ray is actually hitting a game object, preferably the ground. So we're gonna say float, maybe like hit dist, which is going to stand for hit distance, is equal to 0f. We could actually make that 0.0f just to make it a little bit more secure. There we go. And now I want to have an if statement that is going to be checking for if player playing.raycast, ray, comma, and then out hit distance. So hit dist, and then obviously braces, oops, or brackets, curly brackets, braces. And I want to here create 53.target point is equal to ray.get point hit distance, or hit dist once again. So we're just checking for if player plane is actually being hit by this ray that we created, and we're also calculating the vector 3, which is going to be the target point where the camera basically hits, and we're actually getting that point, and also calculating the hit distance, which is very important. So, and then I want to say quaternion, there we go. Target rotation, I guess, or like player, yeah, target rotation should be fine. Rotation is equal to quaternion dot look rotation. Let's see here. Target point, we're going to be calling that variable that we created, and then we're going to say minus transform that position. So that should be fine. This is going to be calculating the target rotation or the rotation of the player. That should be fine. The name transform does not exist in the current context. Transform. Transform that position, that's what it's supposed to be. So I also want to set target rotation.x to 0, so that we don't rotate it in wrong axis, so that it doesn't, you know, rotate like vertically. And I also want to set target rotation.z to 0, because y is going to be the axis that we want to rotate it in, if I remember correctly. If it's wrong, I'm going to come back here and edit that, but it should be working fine as well. And last but not least, we want to set the transform.rotation for the player, so that we actually do rotate the player. So these have been the calculations so far, and now we're going to be setting that or putting that to the effect. So transform.rotation is equal to quaternion.slurp, which is going to be a function of the quaternion family. I'm gonna try to leave some useful links for these quaternions and vector 3s if you guys would like to see them. Either in the, well, yeah, I can link them in the description, and I'm gonna try not to forget this time. I'm so bad at it, like I'm way too terrible about it. But I'm gonna try to remember, and I'm actually going to note it somewhere so that I don't forget about that. But anyway, so quaternion.slurp, and inside of parentheses we're gonna set transform.rotation, sorry, and then target rotation. Let's try with the smoothness of 7f again, just because it's my favorite number once again. And then we're gonna set that to, or multiply that by time.delta time, so we actually do rotate every second. And it's gonna be rotating by 7 units or 7 float units, whatever, by each second. Basically, when you multiply a value by time.delta time, it's gonna mean that it's going to be doing something, in this case, rotate by 7 units or whatever, in each second. So that's pretty much it. With that being said, I can actually go back to Unity, and we'll try this out. So the cube should be rotating towards the mouse. So if I just, oh, and also I can also just go to player holder and attach the camera to the camera spot here. It's not very important right now because we're not using the camera variable, but still, you know, in the future we're going to be using that, and you want to be able to actually still have a value for it. Still, you know, in the future, the camera, and we'll something in this case. Rotate by 7 units or whatever. And we'll try this out. So the cube should be rotating towards the mouse. So if I just... Oh, and also, I can also just go to player holder and attach the camera to the camera spot here. It's not very important right now because we're not using the camera variable, but still, you know, in the future we're going to be using that, and you want to be able to actually still have a value for that. And for movement speed, you can set it to 10. Once again, we're also not using movement right. But you can still have the value just to make sure that you don't really forget about it. So you can see that the cube is actually facing the... mouse position, which is really good. And what I'm going to do to make a better demonstration of this, I'm actually going to create a very simple movement system for just forward movement. So I'm going to jump down below this if player plane. Actually, I can also cast or like call a comment here and say player facing mouse, just so that we actually have a little bit of commented. Source code, and below that I'm going to say player movement, and inside of here I'm just going to say if input.get key down keycode.w transform translate vector3 forward times movement speed times time dot delta time. There we go, and then end it off. I'm obviously going to make a more advanced movement system for this, but for the moment being, I just want to test this out because I've seen that the facing or like the rotation of the player is working properly as well as the camera, but I still want to make sure that it works out fine. So I made a mistake once again, and this is very usual. So instead of using input.getKey down, you want to say input.getKey. That's going to mean, the difference is that if you're using getKey, that means you're holding down the button that you actually refer to here, which is W in my case. And if you say get key down, it means you just click the key, and then, you know, if you ever hold it, it's not gonna play any, it's not gonna make any matter. So you just want to have get key in order to press and hold down the button. So now you can see that we can actually move the player freely, and you can also see that the movement speed is way too high, so I'm gonna lower that value in just a bit. Let's try with 7. I mean, every 7, like 7s have been working out fine for the moment. Have you realized that, guys? Like 7s are actually really good. That's my lucky number, my favorite number, and also the number that also works with whatever you do in Unity. 7 is like the new 42, the answer to fucking universe and stuff. Every day you learn something new on this channel, even I do. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this episode, guys. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Before I actually end this off, yeah, whatever. Actually, I can create the material in my next episode. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Let's Make. I'm still forgetting the name of this series. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope you all found this helpful. If you did, make sure to let me know in the comments down below, and also leave a like down below, guys. It really helps me out a lot. and it also supports me and shows me the support that you're giving for my videos. And it also makes it a little bit easier for me to understand what videos that I should keep on making. So if you want to see more of this tutorial, let me know by clicking the like down below, and also leave a comment if you have any feedback, if you have any features I would like to see in this game. And yeah, with that being said, also hit that subscribe button down below in the face if you want to stay up to tuned for new videos coming soon. And I'll catch you guys in the comments down below. See you guys, peace out, bye bye.
道を駆けて